Okay. Hey, I'm Emma, aka Midsummer Knits Dream, and today I'm going to be making a video talking about my stash, how I organize my stash, and also my future plans for most of the yarn in my stash. So without further ado, let's get into the video. I wanted to start off by showing some clips of my stash and also talking about how I organize my stash. So to start off with, I did not come up with this idea by myself. I use a pegboard to organize my yarn, and I've seen a couple of other people do that online, and that's where I sort of got the idea. So I saw Tana's Fiber Arts on Instagram post a video of her putting her yarn on a pegboard, and I thought that looked really cool. I saw another girl on TikTok do it as well, but those two people were the people that organized me to get a pegboard to start putting my yarn on. So after seeing these boards and being really inspired by them, again, I can't really take credit here because my boyfriend is the one who put up the pegboard. I helped him a little bit by going to Home Depot and sort of figuring out what supplies we needed alongside him, but he was the one who actually did the drilling and put the board up itself. So I can't take credit for that, nor can I necessarily explain all the steps in the process. However, you do need 2 strips of wood to put behind the pegboard, because the way the pegboard works is that when you hang a peg on the board, it's actually not touching the wall. There's a gap between the board and the wall, and the peg itself has a system to sort of latch onto the back of the board and keep itself up. So you need 2 strips of wood to hang behind the pegboard to create that gap between the board and the wall. So we had 2 strips of wood, we drilled those in and then drilled the pegboard itself in. Again, I'm not really going to be the best at describing technical details of this, but we basically just looked up a pegboard drilling or mounting tutorial and followed that. I really like organizing using a pegboard because it's very visually pleasing. You can also see all of your yarn in one place, so nothing's ever going to be, you know, at the bottom of the bin and get forgotten. It's going to be really easy to see what colors you have and sort of put those together in your mind. And just to have an idea of all the different yarn you have, you can really easily see all of it visually. With that being said, there are a couple of kinks with the pegboard approach that I'm going to note as well, just to be honest with you guys about how I keep my yarn organized and if I recommend this approach. There are a couple of small kinks with it, one being that there's no way to really tell which yarn is which unless you store the labels with the yarn somehow. Because I really wanted my board to look really beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, I did not store the labels with the yarn, and I'm trying to do this sort of organization system where I have a little strand of the yarn that I attach to the label and then keep it in a binder. So far that has worked alright, but there are actually a couple of balls of yarn where I lost the label or, you know, didn't write down what the yarn was and now I don't know what it is. So my first tip with this pegboard approach is that you have to have some sort of organization system in mind when you're setting it up, because this system does not inherently keep the labels with the yarn unless you set up some sort of system to organize and keep track of your yarn. So the second sort of kink in this pegboard approach is that it's a little bit tricky to add new yarn to the board. So as you can see from my pictures and videos of the board, I have half of the board in this sort of like rainbow setup where I just have multiple balls of yarn that I've placed on the board, and I have the other half with just some skeins of yarn that I haven't wound. So the skeins of yarn are really just an extra touch that I added because the pegboards that I got inspired by, they had all included their balls of yarn just directly put on the board, the way that the right half of my board is organized. But because I had so many sweater quantities or garment quantities of yarn that I hadn't wound up yet, I decided to just add a couple of pegs to the left side and directly hang those skeins. Aside from that section of the board, for the sort of rainbow section of the board where I've just placed the skeins on the board directly, it's really tricky to add additional balls of yarn. So if, for example, I got a new yellow ball of yarn, I would have to reorganize the entire board to add that ball of yarn. So that's just another struggle I've had with it. To be honest, I'm a huge perfectionist with my pegboard, and that's why these 2 things have been a struggle for me. If you were just a little bit less of a perfectionist and didn't really care too much if the yarn was perfectly organized, both of those things would be like a lot easier for you to handle. Overall, I really like the pegboard approach just in that it's so visual, I can see all of my yarn really easily, and it's honestly really pretty. It's a really nice decoration to add to my room. So overall I do like it, but I will note that there are some difficulties with it as well, and if you hear these difficulties and think that would be annoying to deal with, you might not want to get a pegboard. You might want to do some other sort of organization where you're just keeping your yarns in bins or in containers. Yeah, so overall, I like the pegboard approach. It might not be for you or for everyone, but I really love it for myself. So now we're going to get into the next part of the video, which is where I'm going to show you guys hopefully all the yarn from my stash, or a good portion of it, and talk about what I'm interested in doing with all of that yarn. So let's get into it. So the first yarn that I have is called Axis by Lily Kate. I have 10 skeins of this dark green color. I have 10 skeins of this yarn because I did Lily Kate's, the one that I want crop cal or knit along, and she said at the end of the cal she was going to choose a random person who participated in the cal to receive a sweater quantity of her yarn, and I happened to win that. So that was really exciting for me. I've never won one of these giveaways before, at least not that I can think of. And this is such a cool prize just in that it's a sweater quantity, it's her own yarn, and this yarn is really gorgeous. So I was super excited to win this, and I'm not sure what I'm going to make yet. I was thinking potentially about making something for my boyfriend, but he has very sensitive skin, and I'm not sure if this yarn would really suit his skin well, as in it might irritate him. So I'm thinking maybe I should make something for myself instead. I got a color that I actually think would work for either of us, so I have some ideas for things I can make for myself as well. So my thoughts with this one is that I definitely want to make a sweater because this is such a large quantity of yarn, and I usually don't have this amount of yarn unless I buy it specifically for a sweater that I have in mind. So a couple of ideas I have are potentially a sort of collared sweater. There's a couple that I've seen on Instagram that I liked, one being Mod Tee by Petite Knit. This one is actually for DK weight yarn, so I'd have to make some slight modifications, but I saw someone who made a long sleeve version of that, and I thought it was really gorgeous. So that's one of my ideas. The other one is called the Whiskey Grandpa Henley. This one doesn't really have a fold over collar, but it has just a nice V-neck detailing that I really love. So I think that's another cool idea. I think that a cool complex cabled sweater would also be really gorgeous and would give sort of like dark academia vibes. So that's another idea I have for this yarn. Then the next sweater quantity of yarn that I have is a Stream in Color classy worsted weight yarn in the color Amber Glass. I actually bought this yarn quite a while ago, before I really made my comeback into knitting, and I had a sweater in mind which I actually started but didn't make too much progress on because I remember I was struggling a little bit with the setup, and yeah, so I ended up not completing anything with this yarn. I actually officially frogged that sweater attempt a couple of days ago, and now I have several skeins of this yarn and no idea what to do with it. Truthfully, if I were going out to buy a sweater quantity yarn right now, even without a specific pattern in mind, I would not buy this color. This isn't really a color that I see myself wearing as much as, you know, jewel tones, even neutrals. Those are sort of colors that I reach for more now. With that being said, I don't dislike this color. It's a little bit of a darker yellow. Just with that in mind, I don't necessarily have an idea of what I'm going to make with this yarn yet. You can feel free to let me know if you have any suggestions in the comments of things to make. I'm thinking either a sweater or maybe actually a cardigan would be cool, but I just don't have any ideas yet. I think I'm gonna try to scour Ravelry later on and look for people who have made other yellow sweaters, and maybe that'll inspire me a bit more. But for the time being, this is one of those yarns that I just don't know what to do with, and I have so much of it. This next yarn that I have potentially garment quantities of is from the Scranton Stitcher, or Katie on Instagram. I saw her post about this yarn. She's a yarn dyer, and I thought this color was just so incredibly beautiful that I couldn't pass up the opportunity to get some. So I have 2 skeins of this DK weight merino, and I have 1 skein of this mohair. So I was thinking when I bought this yarn of making some sort of tank top of my own design where the body is worked with this DK weight wool and the straps or sleeves are worked with this mohair. So I'm sort of still in ideation phase and don't necessarily have a concrete direction for this design yet, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to use this yarn to make unless I see something else that really catches my eye and really changes my mind. But this color is called Groovy Kind of Love. I'm not sure if it's still available just because when Katie posted this initially, I know she said it was a limited edition sort of deal, so that's why I jumped on it to buy it so quickly. But I think this is really gorgeous, so you should check out her account if you have a minute. The next yarn I'm going to show you guys takes up a ridiculous amount of space on my pegboard because basically they're all mini skeins. Let me attempt to show you since I put them in a tote bag just for transport. Alright, hopefully you can see a couple of these balls, but this yarn is from the Unique Sheep. It is their 4-ply merino, and I have multiple gradients from them. So just to give a little bit of backstory as to why I have this yarn, my mom saw that this company was doing an advent calendar sort of thing. So basically you buy this advent calendar from them, and then in the 24 days leading up to Christmas, you get to open a little mini skein of yarn every day. And my mom requested for me to get this fingering weight yarn with cool tones. So she actually requested this, thinking that I could use it for my beekeeper's quilt, which is the fingering weight quilt that I'm working on, and I'm using lots of different mini skeins to make that quilt. With that being said, however, some of these are a little bit too variegated for me to use in my quilt because I'm trying to do a more consistent color scheme where I only have solid or semi-solid yarns. So for example, a lot of these blue mini skeins are a little bit more variegated than what I want to use for that quilt. So I am not going to use these for that project. In addition to that, although a lot of these yarns I could use, it feels kind of wrong for me to split up these yarns. So I feel like I should use all or most of these yarns on one single project where they can sort of make a cohesive color palette. So these yarns go basically from pink to a more like muted purple tone to green and then to blue. And I think that I could use all of these together on one big project and it would be really gorgeous. So what I'm thinking for right now is some sort of patchwork sweater or cardigan. I don't know if you guys have seen, a lot of people have recreated this Harry style cardigan that is basically a patchwork cardigan. It doesn't use colors that are similar to this at all actually, but you could always just switch the colors. And I was sort of inspired by that and thought it would be really cool to make some sort of patchwork cardigan or sweater. Honestly, now that I've taken all these yarns down from my pegboard, I might just leave them down and try to get myself to start on this project soon because I've had these yarns for quite a while and just have been putting off starting something with them because there's so much yarn and it kind of stresses me out. But I really love them and I'm really excited to make something with them, so thanks to my mom. That was a really thoughtful gift from her. Next up on the list, we have these full skeins of fingering weight yarn. I feel pretty confident that I can find a sock pattern that I want to make with these when I want to make socks, but at the time being I haven't made socks in a couple of months. I find these yarns all super gorgeous and I'm really excited to make socks out of them. So this one I found at a yarn store in Tahoe. It was made by a local dyer in Reno, and I really loved this colorway because it really reminds me of Lover by Taylor Swift. So it has this sort of baby blue and baby cotton candy pink, and it's really beautiful. I don't normally reach for variegated yarns as much as semi-solid yarns, as you can probably tell from the rest of the yarn that I've shown, but this one is really gorgeous, and I think there's a couple of sock patterns out there that sort of work with the variegated yarns in different ways. For example, I previously made this pattern called Labor and Socks. I'll put up a photo of them. I made them for my mom, and I had this variegated yarn that my mom had actually given me, and I normally struggle a bit more with variegated yarn because occasionally variegated yarn can do this thing called pooling, where the different colors from the yarn line up together, so it sort of creates an almost tie-dye looking pattern, and a lot of knitters actually don't like it. I also don't like it unless it's sort of intentional, but you normally can't really tell if your yarn is going to pool because it depends on the exact width of whatever you're making, and if the colors coincidentally line up, then you'll have an FO that looks sort of different than you thought it would look originally. Anyways, there are sort of patterns that you can use that will combat this pooling. So using my own work, for example, these Labor and Socks did a really great job of preventing pooling and sort of distributing the colors throughout the sock. And I think they're just a really cool pattern. So I might do that pattern or something similar for this yarn. For these other two, I don't necessarily have patterns in mind. This is a darker blue, I believe it's from Sweet Georgia. This is a really good option for, you know, any man in my life, like my dad or my boyfriend, just in that it's like a very safe color, like a dark blue. But I could also make something for myself if I find any cool patterns. This last skein of yarn, I forget where it's from, I'll see if I can find the label, but it's this really gorgeous hand-dyed, sort of semi-solid blue. I don't even know what to call this blue. I guess it's like a mid-tone blue. It really feels very like mermaidy to me, but I'm not sure which sock pattern I'm going to make with this yet, but most likely socks, and I don't know, it's really gorgeous and mermaidy. I feel like you could do some really cool stitch patterns with this and it would turn out really beautifully. So these 3 balls of yarn I'll have in mind for socks, but I just don't have like completely concrete plans in place yet. Next up, some of these yarns aren't even on my wall, but I have a few more yarns that I'm planning to use for my beekeeper's quilt. So as I mentioned previously, this is a quilt that I'm making that uses fingering weight yarn, and I've bought tons of different mini skeins to work on this quilt with just because I didn't have enough leftovers of fingering weight yarn to create the quilt with only leftovers. I know a few people have probably done their quilts with only leftovers, which is really admirable, but as someone who recently got back into knitting and has only done a few projects with fingering weight yarn, I just didn't have anywhere near enough yarn. So I bought so many different mini skeins, and this is just a small collection of the ones that I bought, and these are just the ones that I have remaining complete mini skeins to work on this project with. Actually, this one is a leftover from one project that I did, my Liesel socks, but the others are all mini skeins. I don't actually have the names of most of these because I did not organize my stash very well. As I said, I'm trying to do this system where I'm keeping the labels and then keeping like a little strand of yarn with the label, sort of like this label that I did it with, but when I initially set up this pegboard, I did not do a very good job of labeling my stash, so I'm actually not even sure what most of these yarns are, but I bought them all for the purpose of my beekeeper's quilt, so that's what I'm going to be using those for. To be honest, at this point I have several balls of yarn left still, but these are all yarns that I just don't know what I'm going to do with. So I'm very open to recommendations for patterns, especially for single skeins. Some of these I think I could try to work on some like scrap projects with, or some sort of stash busting projects, but at the time being, I don't have a concrete plan in place for any of these. So first off, I have some leftovers from my side sleeve blouse. These are just the worsted weight yarns. I basically used the entire 2 balls of mohair yarn that I had. So this worsted weight is all of the yarn that I have remaining. I was thinking of potentially making scrunchies with these, but I'm not sure if this yarn is a little bit too thick and wouldn't really work as well for a scrunchie. So that's the only idea I had in mind. I think this is about 1 skein, honestly, so if you have any ideas for a single skein of worsted weight, I'm open to those ideas. Next up on the list of yarn I don't know what to do with, I have 4 partial skeins of yarn from Knit Picks. These are all fingering weight, and my grandma gave these to me to work my beekeeper's quilt with, which I really appreciate. However, I've already made several hexagons in each of these colors, and for at least a couple of the colors, I'm at the point where I can't make more hexagons in these colors without sort of disrupting the pattern I have in mind for it. So for my beekeeper's quilt, the way I'm arranging the hexagons, I want them to be in sort of a rainbow pattern, but however, I don't want the same colors of hexagons touching each other. Yeah, I really don't know what to do with these yarns at this point if I'm not going to make more hexagons, in which case I'm not sure what to do with these. I don't really like how these colors look together, but separately I wouldn't have enough of any of these colors to make anything. I'm not sure what to do with them, to be honest, so we'll see. I don't know about these. Next up, I have these 2, I truly don't know what these are called, but I have these 2 balls of yarn, and I got these in my childhood, so I genuinely don't remember getting them. I don't remember where I got them from, what plan I had for them, but I believe these are both lace weight, and I forget exactly the fabric, I think it's linen or something. So these are another item in my stash that I truly have no idea what to do with. I think when I got them as a kid, I might have been interested in knitting lace because I'd done like a couple of lace shawls when I was younger, and that's probably what these are best suited for. Although I'm not sure, I haven't worked with linen before, so I truly don't know what it's best suited for. Despite that being what I was interested in at the time, I'm not really into knitting lace shawls anymore. I just don't wear them, so they're not something that I want to knit at this point in my life, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with these. If you have suggestions for sort of what this would be good for, feel free to leave a comment. I'm going to say that for all of the remaining yarns, I think, because I truly just am lost on what to do with some of these. At this point, I'm probably not going to go into detail in the last couple skeins of yarn. I think I have 5 more skeins that I just truly don't know what to do with. I just don't have any plans for these. Most of these are around worsted weight single skeins, and some of these are leftovers from other products that I've made, and some of them are just kind of one-off skeins that I have for whatever reason. These are for my mom, but they are too thick for me to use for my beekeeper's quilt, And two of these are leftovers from tank tops that I made. This top one is from the one that I want crop, and this bottom one's from my Made You Look top. And then this middle one I believe is Quince & Co, and it's just a random one-off worsted weight skein. So I don't know what to do with any of these as well. I think these could be a good candidate for a stash busting project if I sort of get some in-between colors that make these colors look good together, since they're just like very aggressive primary colors. But for the time being, again, not sure what to do with these. Okay, that is it for my stash video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm guessing this was a pretty long video once I edited it all together, so I appreciate if you stayed for the entire video. I hope that you liked seeing how I organize my stash as well as some of my plans for my stash. Definitely let me know if you have any ideas for stash busting or even for just one-off projects. I know I could probably always make some hats or something, but I'm not really looking to make hats as much just because I live in a warmer climate and I don't need that many hats. But if you just have any other ideas of sort of like stash busting projects I can make or things I can make to use in my home, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!